Thank you very much for coming this evening. My name is Gladden Pappin. I'm the president of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our event, The Western Commitment to Natural Rights, the Key to Transatlantic Renewal. This is a very special event, not only for the life of the Hungarian Institute, but also thanks to the many colleague and co-sponsoring institutions that are helping us this evening, chiefly the Embassy of the United States in Budapest, and also the Center for Fundamental Rights. So thank you to the colleagues in the Embassy and the Center, as well as to my own colleagues and those of Aranyibástia for helping put this evening together. We have a very special guest this evening who will start us off with a short speech followed by a panel. This is my dear friend Samson. He is a senior advisor in the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Prior to that, he worked for several years at an organization in Washington, which has turned out to be quite important and influential in developing the policy and personnel shape of the current Trump administration, namely American Moment. Prior to that, he was a native son of the great state of Texas, where I most recently lived as well. And ever since then, ever since growing up there and studying at the University of Texas at Austin, he's been very active in politics and now in, statecraft. So we're very delighted to welcome Sam here this evening. He caught the attention of the international community earlier this year when the State Department launched a Substack, and one of the first pieces on that was a piece called "The Need for Civilizational Allies in Europe." And many people have asked and wondered about the intellectual stance and the strategic viewpoint behind a lot of the directions of the new American administration. These were indicated, some of these were indicated in that piece, as well as in other early statements from the second Trump administration. And so we're really delighted to have the author of that paper with us this evening for a full discussion of its ideas and implications, as well as in light of the new U.S. national security strategy, particularly given that that strategy was published just Friday before last. It's only been a week or so. And so we're very privileged, I think, to have the opportunity to discuss with someone from the State Department the implications of that document for Europe, for Western civilization as a whole. And therefore, please join me in welcoming Sam Samson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. And can I say, since we're in Hungary, Merry Christmas. We're allowed to say Merry Christmas, right? I know a lot of people came despite many Christmas parties, which, if they were holiday parties and people were going to holiday parties, I might have been taking some offense. But since, they're Christmas parties, it means a lot to me that you would miss them to come here for this. Thank you, Gladden. Thank you, the fellow panelists, Miklós, and others. Thank you to the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Budapest, our chargé d'affaires, Caroline Savage, the staff for hosting us, and a special shout out to my colleague Keely Bakken, who's here from our Office of Natural Rights, who's been an incredible partner on this trip. It's fitting that we are gathered right now here in Budapest, a city that has endured tyranny and foreign occupation, yet stands today as a living testament to the resilience of the Hungarian people. Over the centuries, Hungarians have bravely defended their freedom from external threats. Mongols, Ottomans, Nazis, and Soviets who repeatedly sought to conquer their people, erase their faith, and alter their identity. In the aftermath of the First World War, Hungary resisted Bela Kun's efforts to impose a Bolshevik regime through blood. After World War II, Hungarian patriotism proved too formidable an adversary for a direct assault. Even with the might of the Red Army, the communists were reduced to utilizing censorship and social stigmatization to isolate their opponents. Those same tactics are now being employed by a sprawling regulatory apparatus that cloaks repression under the guise of progress and public safety. Across the European continent, governments, activist NGOs, and supranational bodies increasingly wield technology, courts, and political institutions to restrict patriotic voices, erode national sovereignty, and enforce rigid ideological conformity. In Finland, for example, a sitting member of parliament has faced multiple critical charges, criminal charges for simply tweeting a Bible verse. In France, presidential candidate Marine Le Pen was summarily banned from running for president despite leading in the polls. In Germany, the popular AfD party has been labeled a right-wing extremist group, paving the way for their disqualification. Across the continent, from Poland to Romania to Turkey, political figures are being barred from a fair electoral process through technical disqualifications. As Vice President Vance warned in Munich earlier this year, the greatest danger to the West and to Europe has become the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values. The EU's Digital Services Act and other regulations codify censorship, empowering trusted flaggers and other radical leftist NGOs with sweeping de facto authority to suppress unwanted speech. Under the DSA, the European Commission just fined X 120 million euros under so-called transparency violations in an egregious attempt of extraterritorial censorship. The EU threatens its sovereign members with legal retaliation if they resist enforcing their bureaucratic standards. Ireland, for example, faces lawsuits for its rightful hesitation to comply with Brussels' speech directives. Hungary, of course, is no stranger to such coercive pressure, as seen most recently through its admirable resistance to the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact. In the face of these assaults, Hungary has held firm, preserving its heritage, protecting its communities, and safeguarding its way of life. Sadly, the same cannot be said for Europe as a whole. Mass migration has become rampant, with borders violated, citizens displaced from their homes, and local populations increasingly victimized by sexual assault, human trafficking, and other human rights abuses. Thousands of women and girls have been victimized by migrant grooming gangs in the United Kingdom alone. Clearly, this is not a Europe of free speech and self-governance. Increasingly, this is a Europe destabilized by mass migration, where bureaucratic institutions are weaponized to stifle disfavored voices, and legal systems are used to silence political opponents. But make no mistake, this jeopardizes civil stability and weakens the foundations of our transatlantic alliance. And this is why the Trump administration is sounding the alarm to our friends in Europe. America and Europe are not merely political partners. We are partners in civilization. This civilization was forged over millennia, shaped by a shared culture, a common moral inheritance, and a unique bonds of affection. These are not abstractions. They are the living soil from which our freedoms, our duties, and our mutual commitments have grown. It is our shared Western civilization, not simple praxis or utility, that commands our loyalty and demands our defense. Now, in my time at the State Department, some have asked me to define Western civilization more broadly. Who belongs to it? What are its boundaries? But this intellectual parsing of what constitutes the West is not, I believe, the right question. The West is not a laboratory experiment to be endlessly dissected and reclassified. It is a particular people, a particular civilization, one you know when you see it, when you experience it, and when you belong to it. This intuitive recognition is not a flaw, it's a strength. The more urgent question, I would posit, is why is Western civilization worth defending? Let me offer 3 answers. First, at the most basic level, the West does indeed represent a vital strategic and economic alliance. Our nations share essential interests that must be defended in a world of growing hostility, especially from rising authoritarian powers, and above all, an ascendant China that stands often in opposition to the West and its values. Central to this are deep commercial ties, industrial cooperation, and shared capacity for innovation and productivity. The West is not just a market to be sold to the highest bidder. Those who care for it know that it must be a fortress of independence, strength, and capability. The 20th century vividly illustrates this point. As our State Department counselor Michael Needham highlighted at this year's Reindustrialized Summit in Detroit, the Allied victory in World War II was only possible because of an unmatched capacity for industrial mobilization. Factories in the United States and Allied Europe produced arms, technology, and supplies at unprecedented scale and speed. That capacity was no fluke. It was a civilizational advantage, achieved because of who we are and what we believe. It remains one of our greatest assets when facing today's challenges. On this front, the commitment of NATO members to hitting their spending targets under the work of President Trump is a welcome and encouraging advancement. A second, more fundamental reason belies the first, the proximity. The ordo amoris, the order of love, must guide how we think about alliances too. America and Europe share a deep cultural and familial kinship. From classical philosophy to Christian theology, Our legal and political traditions draw from the same source. Great European and American thinkers alike have shaped our understanding of natural law, ordered liberty, and human dignity. Many of our citizens share bonds of marriage and family. The United States is, in every meaningful sense, culturally and historically closer to Europe than any other region on Earth. And this reflects a basic truth of human nature. We have a moral obligation to protect and preserve that which is closest to us. A symbol of this proximity is on display in the Hungarian Parliament building. The Holy Crown with which Pope Sylvester blessed King Stephen on Christmas Day, very near to now, has resided there for over a millennium. Yet in 1945, in the face of an advancing Red Army, a Hungarian colonel handed the crown over to an American counterpart. He understood that no matter what happened in the days ahead, the symbol of faith and nation would be safe in America. That crown was kept secure at Fort Knox until the day it could be returned to the Hungarian people and symbolize their freedom once again. Third, and most fundamentally, the West is worth defending because of its great anthropology. Not just abstract ideas, but its people, culture, faith, and ultimately, its recognition of the truth itself that has fostered mankind's understanding of human nature and human flourishing. It begins with the wisdom of antiquity. Aristotle taught that man is a political being, and that virtue, that is, acting in accord with our nature, leads to eudaimonia, the good life. Cicero in the Roman tradition emphasized civic duty and national identity, the strong city as being essential to living well. Christianity fully revealed man's ultimate nature, being made in the imago Dei, the image and likeness of God. St. Thomas Aquinas, one of my personal heroes, synthesized these realities, grounding natural law in divine reason and rooting political life and duties within the moral order. The Magna Carta enshrined the principles of this law over rulers. And the spirit of the West, Homer's epics, Constantine's conversion, Columbus's voyages, Thomas More's martyrdom, Beethoven's symphonies, Washington's crossing of the Delaware, Lewis and Clark's westward expansion, even Armstrong's one small step on the moon, all reflect this moral and intellectual fortitude, each a manifestation of the great civilization that we should all be proud of. At the heart of Western civilization lies this central truth, that man is a rational, free, and moral being with rights grounded not in the shifting will of the state, but in nature and in God. And it is from this truth that our greatest achievements flow. Now, I believe that America is one of the crowning jewels of that tradition. The Declaration of Independence's famous words that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights echoes Aristotle, Aquinas, and other great Europeans who recognize that all men are born with natural rights that no government can deny. But we must also remember that Western civilization is not something that can be uprooted and transplanted anywhere in the world. The West is not a school curriculum. It is an embodied reality, a people with a clear-eyed vision of who man is and what he is made for. It is this civilizational confidence that today's globalist worldview rejects. It disdains the West and the truths it recognizes, its people, its virtues, its history, and its essential understanding of the human person. A new progressive theology condemns tradition as unnecessary. Religious faith is dismissed as antiquated. Human rights are conformed to ideological agendas. Migration-related abuses are covered up. Family life is labeled oppressive. Patriotism is branded racist or extremist. It demands the shedding of a colonialist past to reach an end of history without borders, morals, or economic limitations. Those who question this new orthodoxy are labeled threats to democracy and silenced. The United States and President Trump, like Hungary, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and other freedom-loving nations and people in Europe, are no strangers to these types of slanderous attacks. This silencing is more than political censorship. It stifles the West's adventurous spirit and attacks the very foundations of civil society. When truth is deemed offensive, patriotism labeled extremism, faith dismissed as foolish, and rights reduced to identity politics, what is at risk is not merely public policy, but civilization itself. To defend the West is to embrace its heritage with pride, as a blessing and a light amid what Pope Benedict XVI called the dictatorship of relativism. We therefore must pursue a robust defense of culture, history, religion, borders, and ultimately the West's unique anthropology, the truth of man's rational, social nature, the imago Dei, and so too, critically, of natural rights. In that spirit, the State Department's new Office of Natural Rights is a major advance. By rejecting novel and ideological ideas that have grown out of a positivist approach to human rights, it returns America to its Western roots, to the goods of virtue, freedom, and objective truth upon which our society depends. This office will engage in targeted action to resist traditional authoritarians and modern ideologues alike who seek to undermine these core societal goods. This is part of President Trump and Secretary Rubio's vital commitment to a diplomacy that unapologetically champions American values, deliberately pursues America's national interest, and diligently works alongside those allies who share those enduring values and interests. In this common civilizational struggle, we must never lose sight of the fact that our nations and the traditions we represent are not limited to an individual or a party or an election. Institutions and leaders must do more than tolerate the West's virtues. They must hold themselves and those who lead them to the same standard. As President Trump mentioned during Prime Minister Orbán's visit to Washington last month, Hungary should be applauded for its noble efforts on this front. Indeed, to quote our president, this is a golden age for US-Hungary relations. And as we move forward together, you can all be assured that the Trump administration and the American people stand alongside you as civilizational allies. The work ahead is immense, but so too is the legacy that we inherit. By rediscovering, defending, and promoting the goods of our common culture, we can ensure that Western civilization remains a living and powerful blessing for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. We're going to move directly into the panel discussion. If people are still coming in, you can pack on in, feel free. Thank you very much, Sam, for the provocative talk. I would like to call Sam, if you'd like to come on up to the, come on up there, wherever you want to sit is good. We have two other guests with us tonight. We have Márton Ugrósdy, Deputy State Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office. Thank you very much for joining us, as well as Miklós, Szánthó, the Director General of the Center for Fundamental Rights. Thank you as well. I'll just shift over here. Perfect. 30 seconds of transition. This was a very, very comprehensive and provocative talk, and as I was listening to it, what I felt was a really strong sense of urgency from Sam. I think this is something that we've seen from the Trump administration as well, an urgency to find even a new language through which the transatlantic relationship could be approached. There has been, in my view, as a spectator and participant in these discussions, an urgency also on the European side to get to know better the thinking that's behind the Trump administration strategy. And I think that this piece that you wrote earlier this year and the speech that you gave tonight bring us a considerable way in that direction. And so I'd like to turn to the colleagues first to discuss this topic. In the international media, there has been a lot of confusion about the new U.S. approach, about the new national security strategy as well. And as I've thought about this, I think it's the case that until a few years ago, conservative voices, or patriotic voices, if we call them that, were kind of isolated from the global discussion. Like there was the global discussion, and that's happening in one layer, and that's happening with reference to more broader international ideas or liberal international ideas, if you will. One thing that's happened in the last few years, a lot of this conversation has gone through Budapest as well, is that conservatives and patriots, if you can say that, have joined this conversation and have linked their voices. And I think what Sam's speech shows is that they're trying to find and are now able to find this kind of common language. So there's a lot of dispute in European quarters about this American rethink and whether it provides the basis for a renewal of the Transatlantic Alliance? I mean, there is a Transatlantic Alliance that already exists. What are its problems, and can it be renewed? So that's the question I'd begin with. I'll put it to the panel, but I'll turn to Márton first. From your Hungarian perspective, do you see that this could provide some kind of basis for a renewal of the Transatlantic Alliance, or what do you see as needed there? And I'll turn to Márton and Miklós, and then allow Sam to engage.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great that all of you came out, especially as actually there are Christmas parties taking place all over the town. My first reaction is that this was a great speech by Sam, but since you're in Budapest, my first question is, what's the big deal? Sorry, no offense, but this is how we've been thinking about the West for a very long time. I think the main reason for that is really simple. This is something which was taken away from us about 500 years ago when the Ottoman invasion came here and we were separated from the West. But we never gave up on these values, especially the ones which came a little bit later in Western Europe, but which roots individual agency and personal liberty, that everyone is created equal to the image of God, which is the foundation of Hungarian civilization as well, because their civilization is founded on Western Christianity, as you had noted it in your reference to the Holy Crown, which was gifted to Saint Stephen, who was the founder of our country. I think where we have a great amount of homework to do is to bring these so far individual and disconnected centers together. I think the other side, the progressives, have the advantage that they've been focusing on the institutions for more than 100 years now. They understood Gramsci, that you actually have to have the long march through the institutions to be successful. And through all different vehicles that they had at their disposal, private and public money, formal and informal networks, some of the major think tanks, organizations, universities, whatever, they have built a network which enables them to spread these ideas effortlessly, because most of this network meets like every month here and there. Occasionally they go to nice resorts, occasionally they go to not so nice resorts, but there's a constant flow of people and ideas. Conservatives, on the other hand, were very much convinced that we don't have to stand up for our values because they're so natural. At the end of the day, that it's self-evident for everybody who has some kind of a logic which resembles the classic Greek tradition, that it cannot be otherwise. So why should we speak out for these issues? Because they're just fine, and everybody will realize that we will eventually get there. And on that account, there's a lesson I learned from Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago, even though he's been a bit strange recently. But I've been to one of his speeches and I came away thinking what I think right now, that what's the big deal? And actually the big deal is that if you're saying these very self-evident things in the West, you're depicted as an outlier, as somebody who's nuts, who's completely disconnected from reality, just by stating and restating self-evident truths which are rooted in our more than 2 millennia old tradition. So maybe the lesson we have to learn here is that if we don't team up, if we don't have these conversations, if we don't have our own Munich security conferences, if you will, there's no way we stand a chance. And there's no way we can get the dialogue in the Greek sense back to the political process, because you will just get canceled, you will be silenced, and then the political essence of the political debate will be gone, because there will be a dictatorship of only one side. And maybe the final point I will make in my initial comments is that the liberals know this well too. There's a very good book I read a couple of years ago. It's Yasha Monk's People versus Democracy. It was written, I think, in 2018. And, he's as liberal as it can get. He used to teach at Central European University here. He got
one of my graduate school colleagues, actually.
Yeah. He's been to Harvard and a bunch of other places. And even he realized before the pandemic that you either have liberty or you either have democracy. I mean, democracy in the name of the rule of the people, because those demands which are connected to personal liberty and freedom itself are incompatible with the progressive model of democracy, which is the rule of the majority, even if the minority begs to differ.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'll be honest, I could not have imagined just a year ago that we will sit here with an official from the State Department having this conversation. And Samuel Samson is the living proof that even Ronald Reagan could be wrong, because Samuel is from the government He is here to help, and he is a good guy.
Don't speak too soon. No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Transatlantic relationship, and the American rethink of this relationship based on the national security strategy. Let's face the truth. I think there is an arising conflict between the White House and the Brussels deep state. And it is because in the past decade or decades, this whole progressive neo-Marxist wokeism has taken over the West. But, thanks to God, last year a guy called Donald J. Trump won the elections in the United States, and this resulted in a new world. There is a new leadership in the White House with President Trump, who is, in a nutshell, who is for God, homeland, and the family. He is the anti-woke president of the United States. But Brussels, the Brussels elites, the Brussels deep state was, and maybe is, still used to a situation in which they have or they had the American big brother behind their back. If it came to ideological questions, cultural war, geopolitical issues, or how to launch a witch hunt against member states of the European Union like Hungary, formally or in Brussels was so brave when doing this because they felt that they had Obama or Biden behind their back. And this changed in the past or during the past year. And but the real problem is that Brussels hasn't changed. And it's very sad to see. I will quote from this national security strategy the following remarks. The economic decline is eclipsed by the real and more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. The larger issues facing Europe include activities of the European Union and other transnational bodies that undermine political liberty and sovereignty, migration policies that are transforming the continent and creating strife, censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates and loss of national identities and self-confidence. Should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. End of quote. From a European perspective, from a Hungarian perspective, as a Hungarian being part of Europe, it's very sad to see those lines from an American document, because in this mentioned conflict, it's obvious that America is on the right side, or the White House is on the right side, and Brussels is on the bad side. This, what I quoted from the strategy, is true. Europe, and honest but very conservative. I think that Brussels is marching to its death. If it comes to economy, if it comes to competitiveness, if it comes to geopolitical influence, Europe or the European Union is losing weight. And this conflict between the US or the White House and Brussels becomes even more obvious if we take a look at how America and the European Union behaves if it comes to the war in Ukraine. It's obvious that the Trump administration intends to promote peace. The intent, of course, is difficult, and it's a long-term process. But the very focus, the very intention is on how to make peace. On the other hand, you have Brussels, and you have the European elite with the Dutch guy Mark Rutte, and they are speaking about how to prepare for a third world war that was experienced by our fathers and grandfathers. And this will be the last sentence. Sorry, my father is 88. He's 88 years old, and he is still with us, thanks to God. But I also talked to my grandparents who lived through the Second World War here in Budapest. And my father also lived through the siege of Budapest by the Russians. And they told me that war is a very, very bad thing. So if it comes to how to rethink the American-European cooperation, the first and most important part would be somehow to bring Brussels to the right side if it comes to the war in Ukraine and peacemaking.
Sam, I have a follow-up question. You can react to these, but here's my framing for it, and you can react as well to the others. After the publication of the National Security Strategy, a lot of the reaction of the European mainstream was, this is an anti-European document. At least that's what they said. They felt we are being attacked, and with us under attack, Europe is under attack. This has been a common refrain since the vice president's speech at the Munich Security Conference, to a certain extent after your piece, after the National Security Strategy. So we've been discussing what this American rethink means and whether it can ground or help to reground the Transatlantic Alliance. So how do you see it? Is this an anti-European stance, or how would you distinguish it?
No, you read my mind. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. On the contrary, when I read the National Security Strategy, I thought, and I read the Europe section in particular, I thought, man, this is probably the most pro-European national security strategy that has come out of the United States in all of its history. I think it's, I don't want to get the exact quote incorrect, but it's something like restoring European greatness. And we talk about European self-confidence and the desire for a prosperous Europe and a flourishing Europe, a sovereign Europe, a strong Europe, a militarily a capable Europe, an economically prosperous Europe, and extend the offer to help facilitate peace, and to help build a safe and secure community for our European friends and allies. That has not been the reception to this national security strategy, which means in order to have such disparate reactions, the idea of what Europe is has to be a point of fundamental disagreement. Now, I'll let my European friends here speak to this, and this is the answer that I think Hungary gives is increasingly and encouragingly, as we note, a very optimistic end to the national security strategy, an increasingly prevalent understanding of European identity on the continent, which is a Europe that resides in those core transcendent values of faith, family, freedom, sovereignty, national capability, and economic liberty, not overregulation, censorship, mass migration, and other leftist social engineering initiatives. To your point, Márton, what's it for? It's a great question. Part of it is somewhat ridiculous to have to say these things, these basic fundamental truths, and for them to be called controversial. In fact, in some parts of Europe, saying the things that I said in this speech would be classified as hate speech, extremist. I'm sure that once this thing gets out, they're going to talk about it as theocratic or racist or fascist or whatnot. On the contrary, these are basic normative truths that not only Europeans but smart thinkers throughout human history have understood about human nature, about national identity, about human flourishing. And for there to be a reaction of such disgust or frustration to these basic truths is an indication of the ideological co-optation of what we hope is a strong and prosperous relationship with the European continent, with European member states, and indeed also with the European Union. So when I look at the national security strategy, I certainly think it is an extremely pro-European document. I hope that the people of Europe People who see their fundamental rights, their democratic choice, being threatened by unelected, unaccountable individuals in Brussels. Again, to make a distinction between the European project and these unelected bureaucrats. But the European people and their well-being, I hope that they see the Trump administration as a very great ally, a very great friend. That is certainly our intention. We want you to be self-determining. We want the democratic process to exist. We want economic and prosperity and peace for our friends. And we think the way to get to that is to get back to actually a much older and much more fundamental understanding of what grounds our transatlantic relationship. This is nothing novel. This is much more fundamental, and we hope much more useful to achieving the goals that all of us have together.
Okay, Sam, while we've got you on a line, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
As
Maybe.
the moderator, I'm going to ask one anyway. So there have been several types of rights mentioned, and I think probably the ideas are all harmonious, but you've got, I think this is relevant for the question of, how does America envision its role in the world? How does it envision its role in international institutions? This is something that intersects with your office. You've got the Bureau of Democracy, the bureaucracy. There's a bureaucracy there too. Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. You've got an Office of Natural Rights in there. I think natural rights is maybe a new contribution, not intellectually per se of the Trump administration, but it's something that the new administration is bringing into the international discourse. Here in Hungary, we've got the Center for Fundamental Rights, which somehow is pointing in the same direction. How do you see these concepts, or what do you see as the distinctive advantage of natural rights, since you've picked it and advocated for it? What do you see as the distinctive advantage of that in the modern history of international institutions and organizations and America's role, basically?
Well, thanks. It's also a very good question. I will take a little bit of American pride of place. Natural rights is kind of a derivative of our Declaration of Independence, is unalienable rights. Now, people say, okay, but does natural rights mean the same thing as human rights as used in the international context? Do natural rights entail the rights seen in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights? Does it include the fundamental rights that are talked about in Hungary? The reason, I think we're all circling basically the same concept, because the issue that we've seen, certainly in my Bureau, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the State Department, was a kind of co-optation of human rights language. In theory, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the idea of human rights is not only a valid but essential to kind of the idea of democratic self-governance. It presupposes the idea that all people possess a certain dignity and are endowed with certain rights that no government can arbitrate or deny, is fundamental to the idea of democratic self-governance, and I would hope is shared among all European countries as kind of a basic premise of democracy. The problem is that, like many well-intentioned initiatives that came out of the post-war consensus in the 20th century, was the co-optation of these terms by ideological and radical individuals of a progressive persuasion who decided to pervert the notion of human rights and weaponize it into a bludgeoning tool for their own progressive agenda. So how did that manifest itself? Well, one way was the reduction of rights to identity politics. Rights were no longer things that were inherent to all men by nature, things that belonged in common, but parts of specific identities. So you had LGBT rights, you had straight rights, you had black rights, you had white rights. And I think that's a very dangerous concept when governments think that they can dictate who has rights and who don't have rights, and also reserve or classify rights according to particular categories. What we mean by natural rights, so to get to the natural rights point, natural rights, we know that it's new to the international language. So the way that we've been explaining it to our international friends is, it's kind of a asserting of rights as we think understood in the annals of democratic self-governance. That is, rights that belong to people by nature, that cannot be arbitrated or reserved to different governments or taken away by different governments, nor can they be reserved to particular identities or groups of people. What that is meant to indicate is a more fundamental reality that I think I talked about in the remarks, which is that in order to have democratic self-governance, you need to have certain grounding first principles. If not, we get, and rights are just playthings of the government, then we get into a, well, I as the Trump administration say that rights are X, Y, and Z, but left-wing government think that rights are rights A, B, and C. And if there's no grounding in a basis in nature or reality, you just get into a kind of ping pong back and forth, and the person that ultimately wins is going to be the person who imposes their rights by force or by tyranny. And so we actually think it's much more conducive to democratic self-governance, and in fact to the history of democratic self-governance, both in the United States and in Europe, to ground our rights in that natural rights framework. Now we can have a semantic discussion. That's the language that we prefer, just because it emphasizes that natural component, that inherent dignity and that inherent nature. But it's more so to kind of indicate the concept of a proper understanding of human rights or inalienable rights, rightly understood.
I want to ask my Hungarian colleagues a little bit more about this issue, starting with Márton and then Miklós, and feel free to bring in any other subjects you want. But Márton, you've been a close watcher of the European political scene. I think it's fair to say that the Trump administration is somehow trying to bring in from the cold some of the political parties that have been unfairly excluded or unjustly excluded from media, politics, etc. There's been, at least in my observation from 4 or 5 years living here, also an evolution of the way that the conservative and patriotic parties view the European project. Until recently, maybe even until the formation of the Patriots for Europe European Parliamentary Party platform. Again, you had the liberal mainstream, that's European values, that's orientation toward Europe, and everything else is opposed to it. In the name Patriots for Europe, you've got something different. So what is the vision that you see emerging now from the conservative and patriotic parties in Europe? The new U.S. national security strategy makes some gestures in this direction, at least gently, but from the standpoint of the European mainstream, it's kind of mild revolution. This is something you've been watching closely, both Márton and Miklós. How do you see it?
Just quickly commenting on what Sam said about the importance of the US as the guardian of the Western civilization. Europe did not become a place which it is today by accident. Europe became what it is because it stood on the basis of individual freedoms, the freedom for everybody pursue whatever goals they deem suitable and desirable. And we also enabled free enterprise, at least in the western part of Europe. That provided for the Industrial Revolution. It also provided for colonization, unfortunately. But it resulted in a political and economic system which was, I dare to say, one of the most successful human experiments in the last 500 years. And the pinnacle of that, if you will, is the United States, with the very extreme form of individual liberty, but extreme form in a good way, that it completely unleashed the entrepreneurial potential of people, also because there was lots of land and other resources available. What really strikes me in Europe today is that we take this all granted. We want to preserve it, but we want to move the political community in a direction which is incompatible with these fundamental values, which make the West, at the end of the day, enjoying the benefits of it, but not really paying the costs at the same time. And I think President Trump made it clear there's no free lunch, both when it comes to NATO and also when it comes to the future of the Western civilization. And it expects all of the US allies to walk the walk, finally. And this is painful for the current European political elites because they're not used to competition. And this is where the party dimension comes in, because for a very long time, these patriotic forces were either divided, because patriotism was directed against each other instead of the globalist elites. But I think the recent developments in the last 10 years have fundamentally changed this. One part of this is that how the traditional left-right cleavage in politics is changing into the globalist patriotic cleavage. And that is very visible in how the supporter base of each individual parties are changing. The Republican Party of President Trump is not the Democratic Party of, I don't know, Nixon or even Ronald Reagan. And the UK Reform Party is not a conservative party if you look at their constituencies in a traditional sense. And similarly, patriotic voters in Central and Eastern Europe are not the traditional upper class, if you will, who believe in free enterprise and less competition. They're the people who believe that nations are not just a bunch of people living next to each other, but a living and breathing community that unites us in the long run and enables people to be more successful in their own environment, whether it's their business or their private life, because there's a higher level of trust, there's a higher level of efficiency, and there's a sense of belonging which unites all of us. And I think this is where the fundamental change comes in. And this is why one of the first interviews of Secretary Rubio was so important, because he basically said in his first interview that the United States is not here to teach the rest of the world what kind of political systems they should have. So the universalist, globalist approach to politics was dropped. And the US State Department and implicitly the Trump administration recognized that all of us are responsible for our own fate and our own future. Now, the problem with freedom is that it comes with responsibility. You cannot separate the two. And being responsible for things can be very scary because everything you do has a consequence that you have to face. And this is, I think, at the heart of the debate we're seeing in the European Union, especially as we're entering we are already in the week of the last European Council, which has quite a bunch of contentious issues on the agenda. That, I mean, you can talk about going to war with Russia, but there are consequences. You can confiscate the frozen Russian assets, but you have to face the consequences. You can say that Russia is going to attack Europe in 2030, just as the NATO Secretary General said the other day, but that has consequences. Getting hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians killed on the front line has consequences. And if we are to put the rule of the people back to democracy, we also have to reestablish political accountability, which is clearly not present in Brussels. Look at the economic problems, and this is the final point. Look at the economic problems Europe is facing today. The easy answer to that is that is because evil Russia attacking Ukraine. Well, it's because of the 19 rounds of sanctions as well, which we put in place against Russia in the last 10 years. And as Secretary Besson said the other day, if you try something for 19 times, maybe you're doing something wrong at the end of the day. But I don't see that those people who were making these moves, who were advocating for these measures, are facing any kind of political accountability at the end of the day. Because, you know, French farmers wouldn't be protesting Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels, they will be protesting President Macron in France, because that's where political accountability still exists. And if we screw something up as the Hungarian government, people will protest us, just as they did yesterday or the day before. So democracy comes at a cost that you have to face as a politician, and you cannot have your cake and eat it at the same time. If you run for office, if you make decisions, you have to face the consequences. And this is why we're stuck with the European elites for now as well, because they don't want to face the consequences. They want to prolong the facing of the consequences as long as they can. The problem is similar to cancer, though, that if you delay the treatment for a very long time, maybe your illness will be terminal at the end.
I do agree with Samuel and Márton as well. The question is still patriotic forces in Europe, etc.
Whatever direction you want to take.
Yeah, thank you. So I can speak about whatever I want.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. No, I will stick to the topic.
but I'm watching with a close eye.
Yeah. I try to do my best. So, this whole issue is important because, yes, it leads us not only to the question of consequences in a democracy, but to the question what democracy really is. Is there only one legitimate type of democracy, or there are different alternatives of democracy? Liberal democracy, social democracy, Christian democracy, etc. It is an important question because I was speaking about the rising conflict between the US, the White House administration, and the Brussels deep state. And what we witnessed in the past years all over the West, that the deep states, both in the US and in the European Union, under the Biden administration, under von der Leyen, etc., they said that there is only one, just only one legitimate version of democracy, and that is liberal democracy. Every other type of democratic political systems are not democracies. Hungary is not a democracy. Trump is not a Democrat. I mean, not in that sense if it comes to a political party, but that is why, in the eyes of the American progressives, it was totally okay to wage a lawfare against the that time presidential candidate, Donald Trump. It was totally okay to try to ban him from running on the elections, because he was labeled as a dictator, as a fascist, who cannot enjoy the rules of democracy. And if you take a look at Europe, and then here I will come to the question of the patriotic parties on the old continent. Just take a look at Germany, France, as you mentioned in your speech, Austria, the Netherlands, all over Europe. There are parties that are labeled as non-democratic parties by the elites. AfD in Germany, Le Pen's movement in France, FPÖ in Austria, Wilders' party in the Netherlands. FPÖ won the elections in Austria. Did the elites allow them to form a government? No. On the previous elections, Wilders won in the Netherlands. Did they allow him to not to be the prime minister, just to join the government? No. Le Pen is the most popular potential candidate in France. Do they allow her to run on the elections? No. There's the AfD. Nowadays, it is the most popular party all over Germany. And I think in a few months, officially, they will ban AfD. And based on this logic, in the eyes of the progressive Brussels elites, it's totally okay to wage a lawfare, to launch a witch hunt against Hungary as well, because Hungary is not a democracy in their eyes, because Hungary is not a liberal democracy. And here comes this important factor with the US, because let's stick to the case of Hungary. In the past 14 years, when Brussels launched an attack against the conservative Orbán government or against the previous conservative government of Poland under the governance of peace, those attempts of Brussels were supported by the official US administration, formally or informally, silently or in a loud way, but it was okay. That was the commentary of the White House. And now the whole situation turned upside down, I mean, from a Brussels perspective, because on the last year, the White House was the light tower of moral ethics and global politics. And suddenly, that guy who was labeled as a fascist, as a dictator, as the evil guy by the Brussels elites, now he leads the White House. And he has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Orbán, and he has a very good relationship with all of the conservative leaders all over Europe. So if we would like to understand the situation of the patriotic parties or patriotic movements here in Europe, and we would like to understand the relationship between the conservative or right-wing or patriotic movement and the American MAGA movement. It's important to see that the very same method was implemented against them, both in the US and in Europe. And the big question is, I think, how Brussels would like to overcome this situation. Whether they will seek for some kind of agreement with that, let's say, global but anti-globalist movement. They will say that, okay, we will let Le Pen run. Okay, we will let FPÖ into the government next time. Okay, we won't ban AFD in Germany, etc. Okay, we will stop the political witch hunt against the Orban government. Or the other scenario, which is more that has more chance in my eyes, that the Brussels and the European Union will become officially a dictatorship, and they will ban all of their political opponents in the name of liberal democracy. That's the big question of the short time future, I think.
Can I just have a quick two fingers? I think there's a fundamental problem there that the promise of the progressive liberals have been that leave politics to us and we will deliver economic growth. Basically, they bought the acquiescence of people in general with the promise of ever-growing consumption. But if you look at the European elites in the last 15 years, they mismanaged all the conflicts. They mismanaged the 2008 financial economic crisis. They mismanaged the illegal immigration crisis of 2015. They mismanaged COVID, and they mismanaged the war in Ukraine. And yet, they ask us that, hey, trust us, is going to be fine. Well, we're not going to trust you anymore with that. And then they feel offended that we're not trusting them anymore, which is a bit entertaining for me. But on the other hand, I think this is a similar experience that the US has been going through, especially since 2008. So I don't see it as a surprise that we're coming to similar conclusions from the similar patterns of mistakes which were committed by our elites.
I want to ask Sam what he sees as the role of the US in the world now, according to the Trump administration. And the reason I'm thinking about this at this point in the conversation, we're pretty much at time, so we're about to close and we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the reception. But it seems to me that the history of the West is no longer written just internally. Like, you could say at some point in the past, well, the West can make mistakes, but it's still in charge. It doesn't have any competitors yet. Like, there was some earlier point at which that was true. Now we're at the point where catastrophic mistakes in the West have catastrophic consequences for the West itself. And one place I've found in traveling a lot in the last few years that the perspective which you're articulating and the perspective by which the new administration is operating makes sense is basically everywhere else in the world outside of the European Union, or at least outside of the European Union institutions. I mean, in many other parts of the world, there is no room for catastrophic mistakes. Everyone, you're exposed. You've got to be pragmatic. Even as the Trump admin strategy says, you got to be pragmatic without pragmatism, realistic without being realist. I mean, this is in fact the way that a lot of the rest of the world operates. But clearly, there's this special attention to Europe and the West because that's where we are. That's our civilization. A lot of people, I think, have misread. I'm not trying to answer my own question, but a lot of people have misread the strategy as isolationist and so on and so forth. How do you see, from your standpoint, your bureau, the role of the U.S. in the world?
Great. I'll say one quick thing on the political party question, because
Whatever
a
else.
lot of people are obsessed with what our role is vis-a-vis the rising, kind of call them populist or right of center political parties. All I'll say to that is we want a sovereign Europe. We want a Europe that respects the values that underpin our shared Western heritage and our democracy. So when we're looking at the parties in Europe, there is a trend, there is a pattern of the types of parties, the types of views that are deemed to be, as Miklós said, threats to democracy. And so paradoxically, in order to defend democracy, or some group of people's conception of democracy, that you need to engage in undemocratic behavior. That is something that we find problematic writ large, is something the Trump administration and President Trump have personally experienced. I think everyone on the stage has experienced it to some degree. So we're not here to adjudicate the democratic will of the European people. Now, I think because of mistakes that the European Union has made, that the globalist consensus have made, that's going to lead to certain people and certain ideas and certain values becoming more popular over time. And so, that's something that democracies account for, rightly understood. And so that's our position on that. Is if our friends in Europe are going to claim to be respectable, democratic, self-governing nations, then they should act like respectable, democratic, self-governing nations. To your point about the broader strategy, what I'll say, I'll talk about a little bit about the rest of the world and then back to Europe specifically to wrap us up. On the rest of the world, I think there was a chapeau to the national security strategy that said that this national security strategy cannot be reduced to any sort of particular foreign policy-ism that nerds from the Harvard Kennedy School are kind of obsessed with, like realism, isolationism, globalism, etc. It's a pragmatic America first foreign policy. And so what that means is that we have to contend with the realities of the world and not allow our vision of the world to be clouded by any sort of doctrinal loyalty, or the idea that, well, there are these principles of global liberalism, and if we act contrary to them, by maybe being pragmatic in our pursuit of peace with Russia, or dealing with China in a way that contends with the economic situation around the world, that we're somehow committing a capital sin. President Trump, Secretary Rubio, Vice President Vance have been very clear that there is going to be one formative question that's going to define American foreign policy during our administration, and it is whether the action that we're about to take makes America safer, stronger, and more prosperous or not. And that's what we're going to do. And you see President Trump doing this in how he secured peace across the world, from DRC and Rwanda to now, hopefully, in time, Russia and Ukraine, Thailand, and elsewhere. You see it in the incredible trade deals that we're making with our partners around the world. You see it, and back to Europe. It is particularly, Europe is a particular question. I think there was a very beautiful part of the national security strategy where we talk about the sentimentality that Americans inevitably have for Europe. And I would hope that our European friends, considering our shared history, would have the same, maybe a little bit of sentimentality for us. But when it comes to Europe, the vice president has said many times that we're not here to lecture the world, or to wag our fingers, or to go teach people in Africa how to do gender theory. That's not why we're here. But when it comes to Europe, there is a presupposition based on our shared history, based on our shared values, based on our shared relationship, and all the things that we've done together over the centuries in the name of freedom, in the name of democracy, to defend those things as good, because European countries claim to be democracies. We hope and think they are, and the president has good relationships with European leaders who are more sympathetic to the EU, and also to leaders like Viktor Orban, who he has a tremendous relationship with, who are Eurosceptic. But underlying all of that is a presupposition of the values of self-governance, of democracy, that we all ought to share. So in the Europe case in particular, when we see drifts from that, we see our friends, in a worrisome place, and it comes from a place of genuine affection, I think, to want to help our European friends, to ensure that those values stay healthy and strong, and that indeed, if I can just reaffirm one more time, we want to see a healthy and prosperous and successful and sovereign Europe. And so that's definitely our goal, and we're looking forward to working with all of our partners, including and especially our Hungarian friends, to do just that.
I can't think of a better point on which to close the discussion, which is already past its time. So thank you, first of all, everyone, for coming out on a Monday night during Christmas party week, again, as we're allowed to, it's the official term for it here in Hungary. And so very grateful to our considerable audience this evening. Thank you so much. And everyone, please join me in thanking Samson and our Márton, Ugrósdy, and Miklós Szánthó for their time.